How's it going? Are you excited? It's a cool day. We talked a lot about what subject I should speak on because there's a lot of things that we train on, and everything from visioning to leadership to service to energy management and all sorts of stuff. But we decided on creativity because it just seemed appropriate to kick off the work, to honor the work that y'all have been doing. So that's what I'm going to talk about. For those of you who don't know me, I'm very informal. I got dressed up for you today. And vision is a huge piece of what we do, but I didn't really have one. David Whyte, W-H-Y-T-E, is a very interesting poet, half English, half Irish, and he calls what I did the via negativa. So sometimes when you don't know what you want, but you know totally what you don't want, it's still better to have a vision, but at least knowing what you don't want can help you get someplace good. And mostly I knew I didn't want to go home. Okay, well let's talk about creativity a little bit. So what do you think, as Maria was saying, I mean, you're all going to probably be part of a healthy dental practice or an academic setting that's a healthy setting, but what does a creative culture mean to you?
Change for the better.
Change for the better. I like it. What else? I'm in no rush. I have till 2:15. What else? Okay, innovation sounds good. What else would be in a creative culture? Yeah, I think probably open communication would make good sense. What else? I'm sorry? Positive challenges and differentiation, did somebody say that? Yeah, I like that. What else?
Welcomes the contributions of many.
Yeah. Creative settings are always diverse settings. And it might be diversity inside our head, which I'll come back to, or diversity in terms of people or artistic or whatever contribution, all of the above. And how many of you would consider yourselves to be creative types? About 32%, maybe 33%. It sounds like the project you've all been working on is all about creativity. And it sounds like the design of the project is all about creativity. So there's a little bullet point there about the crisis of creativity. So I speak, like I said, on all sorts of subjects. We talk on visioning, on customer service, open book finance. We have all sorts of stuff that we train on. We probably have 30, 40 internal classes. We kind of have our own little university going within Zingermans. And about 4 years ago, when the economy was sort of in its low point, we started to get a lot of calls from me. I speak a lot around the country, and we started to get all these calls from me to speak about a subject that I never spoke about, which was creativity. And first one comes, then another one comes, and I'm like, God, I could talk about all this other stuff, but I don't have anything on creativity. And I started feeling bad. Then I started feeling really bad because I was like, we don't even have any internal training on creativity. I mean, this is really bad. And I'm like, people are like, well, why not? You guys are so creative. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't know what to say. And they're like, well, how do you do it? Like, you're so creative. Like, who's responsible for creativity at Zingermans? And I'm like, everybody? And they're like, well, like, are you like Google? Like, do you give your employees like 2 hours a day for creative activity? I'm like, no. And they're like, well, when are they supposed to be creative? I'm like, all day. And it really kind of stumped me. And I'm like, I felt bad. Like, they want to like pay a lot of money to have me come and speak about creativity. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. And it really pushed me to start to ponder some of this stuff in a new way. So I actually ended up writing a whole essay on it in the new book. I don't know if you read this one yet, but it's quite an interesting study to find out about creativity. There's a guy named Kenneth Robinson, who's an Englishman, who's written quite a bit about creativity in the educational system. And he said, companies are keen to promote creativity, but they're not sure what it is or who has it. Which I found to be true. What I started to realize is that when the economy crashed, the corporate world all of a sudden was in trouble and the boat was sinking. And all of a sudden they're like, well, okay, start swimming. And everybody's like, well, no, we don't know how to swim. Why? Because they didn't teach them how to swim. So I started to realize that what we've done is sort of become what Maggie and Bayless from Zing Train would call in the training world unconsciously competent about creativity. Okay? So it's not in the workbook, but there's 4 stages of learning a skill. You've been going through these with dentistry, and you go through it with anything in your life, whether it's driving, playing a musical instrument, or anything else. The first stage is what's called unconsciously competent. It's called unconsciously incompetent. Does anybody play violin here? A few of you. Don't be shy. It's okay. Is it bad to be a violinist and a dentist? It's a lot of hand motion with each. Okay, so if these guys were, what's your name? Kasia. So if Kasia was to come up and give a little demo of violin playing for us, we would all move from unconsciously incompetent into the next level, which would be consciously incompetent. In other words, we would still not know how to play it, but we would now have had some sense of what was involved because she would have done a little demo for us. If she were to practice with us a couple hours a day for a year, we might move up to the next level, which would become consciously competent. I'm guessing if you're doing what you're doing, you're somewhere between consciously incompetent and consciously competent. That's part of what going to school is about, right? And when you do it every day for years and years and years, then what happens? You become unconsciously competent. That's where you can do it without paying attention. Does this make sense? So none of these levels are good and none are bad. They're just what they are. We all have different things in our lives that fit into each of them. So I'm pretty much unconsciously incompetent about neurosurgery. I don't think about it. I don't want to think about it. And that's fine because, no pun intended, it allows me to devote brain space to other things. Okay? Driving. I'm guessing most of you are unconsciously competent about driving. That's why you can text, make a phone call, and change the CD and drink coffee all while driving. So, I'm not going to tell your parents, it's okay. The point is, there's things that we're able to do under pressure that allow us to not devote brain space either because we're so good at doing them. When you become unconsciously competent, the problem is you're not a good teacher. Because you're great at it, but you don't know why what you do works, and you can't explain it to anyone else. To be a great professor, you actually don't probably have to be, I'm guessing, the best dentist in history, but you have to be great at being able to teach other people how to be great dentists. You got to be good at it, but this is why in sports, it's very rare that the superstars go on to be great coaches. If you look at the coaches in almost any sport, they were almost never the superstars. The superstars are all unconsciously competent. They're great at it, but they can't teach it to anybody else. The coaches who become great are almost always the players, men or women, who were almost good enough to make it or kind of made it, but they never got to the point where they could just do it in their sleep. Is this making sense? And this is what had happened to us about creativity. We were unconsciously competent about it. We were great at it, but I couldn't explain to anybody why we were good at it. So I started to actually back myself up and figure out what was going on. And I started to look at what was causing us to be creative and why all these other organizations out in the corporate world were anything but creative. And I started to learn what many of you might have already realized I'm headed towards, which is the bottom bullet point, which is whether you think you're creative or not, you are. Everyone is creative. Literally. And I started to realize for the first time a skill that actually went in the reverse order of the stages I just told you about. See, everything else we start unconsciously incompetent and we work our way up to unconsciously competent. But I realized that creativity is the other way around. We're all born unconsciously competent about creativity. Every child is brilliantly creative. Does anybody have kids? Do they kind of play around and make wild, interesting stuff? Yeah. Who here was a kid? About half of you? Okay. That's cool. It's different. So, getting around creative people. Kenneth Robinson, who I quoted before, said creativity is related to culture. Cultural conditions can kindle or kill creativity. So, how do you get around creative people? Well, one way is, I think you're doing it. By living in a healthy organization, people are more creative. Working on a project like this, I don't know much about the details of it, but I've heard about it as an outsider. It's by definition a creative project. You've put yourself into creative tension. The people who developed what is now the norm were considered to be crazy, inappropriate, impolite, et cetera, et cetera. So having the courage to go out and get around those kind of people is no small thing. How do you find those people? My experience is that the natural laws of business, which are on page 7, which you could really call the natural laws of organizational life because it's true for nonprofits like the dental school here at U of M, or they're natural laws of life for us as individuals. It's true for everybody. In my experience, all successful organizations are basically living these natural laws. They don't have to know their natural laws. It's like gravity. You don't have to understand gravity to know what will happen. If you drop your pen, what will happen? It's not a trick question. What if you don't want it to fall? What if we appoint a student group to study it for a while? It'll still fall? Okay, so these are natural laws. Interestingly, you've already heard a lot of them referenced in the 40 minutes that we've been here. At least 2 of you talked about Dr. Polverini's vision for this project. Okay? Most of the time that you guys were introducing was taken up with natural law number 12. Successful organizations, people are having more fun and they're more appreciative. This is universal. Okay, so what I started to realize when I was looking at this crisis of creativity is that when you live in harmony with nature, you bring out the natural energy, the natural creativity that's present in everybody. Our employees don't really know they're being creative any more than your 4-year-old knows they're being creative. They're just having a good time. The problem is when we live in violation of nature, what happens to the energy? When you operate in violation of nature and the environment, what happens? Anybody know about fuel oil? Are we having a little energy crisis on the planet? So we've overtapped natural resources. We're living in violation of nature. I think the same thing happens when we live in violation of these in organizations. When there's no vision, when people aren't appreciative, when we don't believe in what we're doing, it's not much fun. The energy crisis that's been created is quite interesting. Here's some numbers for you. This is a survey of the American workforce 4 or 5 years ago. Only 37% of the employees surveyed knew their company's goals of the place that they worked. Only 37%. Only 20% were enthusiastic about those goals. Only 20% saw how they could do work to support achieving those goals. Only 15% felt like they weren't able to do work towards achieving the goals. And only 20% fully trusted the organization they work for. How's that sound? Good? Grim. This guy named Dean Tucker who taught me this, he said, just to prove how bad that is, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to move from basketball to football. Let me tell you what that would mean if you fielded a football team with that kind of statistical set. Of the 11 guys who go out on the field, only 4 would know what goal they're going towards. Even more depressing, only 2 of them would care. When they break the huddle, only 2 of the 11 would know what position they're supposed to line up in. Only 2 of the 11 feel like their efforts on the field make any difference as to whether the team wins or loses. And all but 2 are just as likely to root for the other team as for their own team. And I laughed really loud too, but see, when you're working in that setting, has anybody been on a losing team? Has anybody worked you had a part-time job while you're going to school in a lousy business? How's that feel? Yeah. And so the problem is out in the world when people are not having fun, when people don't believe in what they're doing, when they don't know where they're going, when their coworkers are not going for greatness, It's depressing. And when you're feeling down and blue and you don't have much hope for a better tomorrow, how's your creativity going to be? Bad. This is the problem, okay? The problem is when you have a crisis of creativity and you haven't tapped your creative skills for a really long time, you can't just turn it on. This became clear to me because around the same time I had had some surgery. And it wasn't horrible, but as a result of my surgery, I got frozen shoulder. I know you're in dentistry, but does anybody know what frozen shoulder is? Oh yeah, it's fun, isn't it? You want to tell them what it is?
You can't turn a light switch on.
Yeah. So for your muscle basically atrophies and you can't lift it above shoulder height. Sucks is the technical description. So through PT, you sort of do these painful exercises, right? All day long you're going like this. But it's amazing when you can't lift your arm above your shoulder how quickly you can readjust your day in order to compensate. So you just pick the shirts from the lower shelf. And when you're thinking of what to make for dinner, you pick the stuff from the bottom cabinet and not from the top cabinet. And you could pretty much figure out how to live without reaching very high most of the time. But the problem is if you're in a crisis and the fire extinguisher is way up here, your arm literally will not go. And this is what I started to realize happened to corporate America. They lived so long with creative atrophy because people weren't having fun, because people didn't believe in their work, because their coworkers weren't going for greatness, because they weren't embracing the positive challenges of doing something meaningful in their lives. And then the economy crashed and they're all like, come on, be creative. And it's just like the same problem I had, their arm didn't work. Okay, and so for us, it's really about how do we keep that from happening? Well, the things on page 6 that come up next are some of the key things that I've learned about that will help you make that happen. The first is to share lots of information. So you're going to do that this afternoon by going and looking at the projects. You're doing it every day here by studying. But the problem in most organizations of any size is that people don't talk to each other. I mean, they talk to each other, but mostly to complain. They don't share information. They don't discuss the business. They discuss the weather. They discuss what the boss did wrong. But those aren't really very helpful. If they are kind of entertaining in the moment, they don't really contribute a lot. So creating ways to share information. So if you're going to go out and run a practice, a couple things that we do is we're open book finance. So that means everybody who works in our organization learns about the finances of the business. So if you come to work with us and you're a busboy or a bus girl, bus woman, you're going to learn about the finances of Zingerman's $50 million organization within the first few weeks or months that you're there. Right? All of our meetings are open with very few exceptions. So that means you could be working with us for a week as a waiter at the Roadhouse, and you could come sit in on the partners meeting. In fact, we pay you to come. Because the point is to be able to share a lot of information in ways that other people wouldn't normally do it. Does this make sense? So learning in the university setting is all about this deep dive. So in order to be creative in your field, it's critical that you become great at the content of your field. Professional journals and conferences and symposia that you will all attend are all about that sharing of information. In a healthy setting, people want to share information. In an unhealthy setting, people don't share information. It's one of the ironies. Stephen Johnson wrote a book about the history of innovation, and it's one of the interesting things about modern business is patents actually diminish creativity. Because although everybody wants them in order to make more money, the problem is we actually hide the information and make it harder to get at instead of sharing it. Thomas Jefferson said, paraphrasing, that if I have a candle with a flame and you light your candle off of my flame, now we both have light. And I have no less the light for you having yours than before you lit yours, right? And so for me, it's really about sharing information and sharing ideas. One of the natural laws, number 10, is that strengths lead to weaknesses and vice versa. So I used to think that my strengths and my weaknesses were engaged in this deep existential battle. and I was always hoping the strengths would win until one day I realized they were the same. All the things you're really good at will lead you to the things that you're not good at, and vice versa. So if you really focus on your field, you have a high likelihood of becoming successful. What's the problem if you devote all your energy to studying dentistry? What will you lose out on? Everything else. But my point is, although it's critical to study the field that you're in your case dentistry, and to immerse yourself at great length, it's critical to creativity is to get outside of what you do. Because the creativity is mostly about connecting things that were not otherwise connected. Does anybody remember who Gutenberg was? What did he invent? Printing press. So if you study Gutenberg, what he actually did was just take what they basically used for a wine press and put paper instead of grapes. And what they ended up with was a printing press. Okay? So a lot of creativity is just about taking a practice, a discipline, a mindset, or an idea that existed over here and putting it into place in a completely different area of work. Is this making sense? Okay. And then the fifth thing is to systemically and culturally support that information. So part of the university setting is designed, hopefully, in order to create those connections. The problem is when we leave the academic setting, we're busy. And people have kids, and they have families, and they work a lot, and they commute. And pretty soon they lose the connection to all of these other things. So if you can create systemic ways to make those connections happen, I think that that's where the creativity comes, because people start to link into new things. So if you create rigor for yourselves, even though I know you're busy and I was in school and I know there's no time, but Sam Keen is a great writer and psychologist and philosopher, and he said, we always make time for the things we want to do. And I'll bet you that if you were to look online and find some dentist that had good articles written about his or her work, and you emailed them and said, I read great things about your work and I'm really interested in how things are going in your part of the country or your part of the world, you'll have a new colleague. Because most of them will be honored that you actually took the time to write and read something about them. And all of a sudden you're connecting information and learning about dentistry in Taiwan, and I, you know, comparing it to here or whatever. And those kind of connections that seem random are not random. The people who are going for greatness, it's another natural law, do the little things that everybody else knows they ought to do but don't feel like doing. So picking up the phone or emailing or reading an extra article, you connect new information in new ways, and all of a sudden good things start to happen. Are you with me? Is this resonating at all, or does this sound completely crazy? Questions before I move forward? Well, it's an interesting thing is that the question is about how do you blend structure with creativity. So no structure, I used to think in my anarchist mind that no structure would be best. But actually no structure is not conducive to creativity. People do better when there's enough structure and values that they understand kind of the frame within which they're working. But too much structure is not helpful either. Somewhere in the middle is a helpful amount. For us, I think that the key is to create structures that require people to think. When people stop thinking, the creativity goes down. Number one. Number two is to create systems that actually look for change and look for opportunity. It's not on your workbook, but it's in this book, as I started to develop this theory that organizations, the way the leader processes information and ideas will be manifested in the way the organization works. So if I reject ideas from the periphery out of hand, that'll never work. I'm probably also rejecting the people on the periphery, and they actually have a lot of ideas. So I've started to work even harder than ever at welcoming ideas and welcoming people from the minute they get there, because I realize I could learn from everybody. So if we create a structure that says find somebody new to the organization and see what they can teach you, then the system itself is creating the creativity. So for us, just as a conversation, and as a real life example, we have 3 steps to great service that we teach. Figure out what the guest would like, get it for them accurately, politely, and enthusiastically. 3rd step, go the extra mile. But we don't, so going the extra mile means doing something for the guest that they didn't ask for. What that is up to you as the person giving the service. How do we create the culture? How do you think we create the culture? Okay, so the vision, if you describe where you want to go, it radically increases the odds of getting there. That's number 1. Number 2 is real life, right? How we treat people. So whether you want to take it from an anarchist standpoint or whatever standpoint you want, Paul and I have never thought we're better than anybody. I think everybody's creative. I believe everybody's creative. I think there's a lot of buzz in the corporate world now about employee engagement. So they all know they're supposed to engage the employee, but they actually think they're better than the employee, but they just know that they could like trick the employee into working harder if they engage with them. It doesn't really work. Well, here's what I would say. The question is, how do we incentivize? I think the money incentive is rarely the highest in a healthy organization. I think people talk about money, but in the end of the day, it's not why I've never gotten up in the morning excited about making money. I don't even care about money. Money for me is like gas in the car. I don't really understand how the internal combustion engine works. I just know when I run out of gas, the car stops. And it kind of sucks generally unless you're right next to the gas station. So for me, that's where the money's important. But what rewards me is seeing employees get excited about their work, watching a 4-year-old eat our cream cheese and loving it because it's the only cream cheese they ever had, and they'll never eat processed cream cheese and think it's good because they grew up on handmade. It's watching people in our community learn. It's the email I got from a guy from Chicago who came to Zing Train the other day to the visioning seminar, and he emailed me, and if I read you his email, I'll cry right now because it's so touching about how powerful it was when he went home and resonated on it. That's what gets me excited. I think that when you create a winning organization, so it's a natural law is that people do their best work when they're part of a great organization, right? So when everybody around you is doing well, what do you want to do? Right. So just last thoughts. I just encourage you to have fun. Creativity. The funny thing about creativity is that I've taught you all this, but now I want you to forget it. Because the more you worry about being creative, the less creative you get. So really it's just about going out and doing great work and having a good time, about having vision, about being appreciative of the people that we're around, and about making a positive difference. What I would leave you with is just a couple quotes. One is from a woman named Tina Seelig who works out west in California, and she said, essentially, if you believe something is possible, then it is. And I think that that's true. And I would just like to encourage you to just sort of let the crazy ideas in your head out. Not necessarily while you're working on the patient, but while you're in dialogue, while you're in school, while you're talking to your peers around the world or around the country, because some of those crazy ideas are actually really good ones. The idea of this program probably started in the same way. And I'm sure when he brought it up for the first time, lots of people said, that's crazy, that'll never work. And yet it's the willingness to stick with those ideas and see them through. And I'll bet you that there's 1 or 2 projects out there that will go on to do great things out in the world too. The problem is you can't only have the 1 or 2 without having the whole group. So I just encourage you to have fun, and I want to compliment all of you on being part of a pretty cool program. It's great to feel the positive energy in here. It's not an accident. And I'm glad that you're out there, so when I break the fillings in my teeth, I have people to go to that will take really good care of me. So thank you all. Have a great day. Congratulations.